Hey weavers, and welcome to another Dueling Rabbits Productions video concerning damask structures on the Drawloom. Today we're going to talk about what we can do with 6 ground shafts and 6 treadles, and have a quick look at some software we can use to aid us in our investigations. For years I've hinted that this project was in the works. If you've not yet seen my previous videos on Drawloom mechanics and damask tie-ups, I urge you to have a look before delving in with me now. To summarize our story so far, damask is a textile where pattern is created using both warp effect and weft effect units on the same side of the cloth. These units are usually interlaced in some sort of twill or satin variant. On a drawloom with a countermarch, the structure for the ground cloth is determined by the tie-up to the lower lambs. The structure for the pattern is determined by the tie-up to the upper lambs. Here's a simple star motif in 5 blocks with yellow pattern on a blue ground. If we are thinking about weaving it on a pattern shaft drawloom, the easiest way to express the setup is with a profile like this, which I produced in Fiberworks. Here we see 5 pattern shafts threaded in a single point. Each black square represents 1 leash, that is, 1 unit of our threading, or 1 pixel in our design. Here is our lift plan. Each black square corresponds to the pattern shaft we need to raise while we treadle our structure. What is missing from this profile, of course, is what our cloth will actually look like when we're done. Are we weaving pseudo-damask, Beiderwand, summer and winter? Many drawloom weavers are accustomed to doing this part in their heads, filling in ground and pattern, using their imaginations and sampling like crazy at the loom. I do this myself, but there are other ways. Let's imagine for a minute that we want to weave our design in twill damask using 6 ground shafts and 6 treadles, so that our cloth looks like this on the side that faces up while we are weaving. Each unit of our ground cloth looks like this, a predominantly blue square 6 by 6 with a strong yellow twill diagonal. Each unit of our pattern looks like this, a predominantly yellow 6 by 6 square with a strong blue diagonal running in the opposite direction. To tie up for our weft effect ground, we attach 1 shaft to 1 treadle each via our lower lambs. On tie-up diagrams, these connections are typically designated with circles or balloons. To tie up for pattern, we attach 1 shaft to 1 treadle each via our upper lambs. These connections are typically designated with black squares. These 2 tie-ups are combined in a draft so that it looks like this. We've all seen millions of these in books and probably drawn more than a few ourselves using graph paper. The question I'm often asked is, how can we reflect our tie-ups and our structure using the weaving programs that we have at our disposal? Fiberworks Silver first, because it's the one I use most often. In addition to using it for my profiles and lift plans, I can simulate any damask structure pretty easily, provided the motif isn't too complex. I have 64 shafts in a single harness at my disposal, so I can, with some effort, chart a 6-end damask design of up to 10 blocks in any variety of interlacements I can come up with. Here is our star rendered in the straight twill damask we've already examined. The draft calls for 36 shafts on a single harness loom. Our warp is yellow and our weft is blue. Our blue ground cloth with its strong yellow diagonals contrasts nicely with our yellow pattern units and their blue diagonals. If you look carefully, you can see that our units are indeed 6 by 6. Because Fiberworks assumes that black squares represent rising shafts, we need to make some changes to our tie-up protocols. For ground, we substitute black squares for balloons. Where we want to weave pattern, we substitute black squares for the empty ones. It works, and we can see what our cloth will look like, and that's probably enough, although there are some obvious flaws for the drawloom weaver. Our threading diagram bears no relationship to the threading of our drawloom's ground or pattern shafts, and our treadling diagram is, shall we say, unhelpful for our purposes. But if we want, we can change our tie-ups to reflect different structures, and I often do this just to see what I can come up with. It's cumbersome, but I stress it works. It's economical, and it may be all you ever need to get the information you want. An alternative is the WeavePoint Complex Drafting Module, which is far more expensive than Fiberworks, but which has useful features for double harness weavers. It is very, very powerful. Let's take a look at how it works with our 6-end straight twill Damask star. Our drawdown is identical to our Fiberworks rendering with its yellow warp and blue weft, but the similarity to Fiberworks pretty much ends there. Here at the top, the CDM allows us to show both harnesses exactly as they are set up on the loom. Here is the straight threading of our units onto our 6 ground shafts. Although I've limited my drawdown in this case, I could draft out the widest imaginable pattern in this software using up to 32 ground shafts. Yikes. Above are my 5 pattern shafts, threaded exactly as they would be in real life. Each row of 6 squares represents 1 leash, or unit's worth, of my pattern shaft threading. Again, I can show the exact interlacement over dozens of pattern shafts if I so choose. Up the side here, we can see the straight treadling so familiar to damask weavers. In this case, 6 treadles are required for my structure, treadled in turn regardless of the pattern I am weaving. Here is my lift plan. Each column is associated directly with the pattern shaft according to my scheme. This column here, for example, represents the leash that is lifted when I raise the foremost pattern shaft here. It is a simple, intuitive draft that gives me a complete record of my setup. Let's look at the tie-up box. It's what brings the whole thing together, but the conventions of the CDM take a little getting used to. Here on the right is the CDM's tie-up box for our straight twill damask. Here towards the center is our tie-up for the lower lambs. I've substituted black squares for our typical balloons. This is the weft effect unit that results. This tie-up is transferred directly to our new diagram, where black squares represent rising shafts. Here's the tie-up for our pattern unit. I've substituted translucent squares for the usual black ones. This is the warp effect unit as it appears in our weaving. Now, in the CDM, sinking shafts are represented by blank squares. The correlation between translucent purple and blank squares is pretty easy to see. All squares with no connections have wee black spots in them. Here's a direct comparison with a more typical tie-up diagram. Here are the rising connections to our lower lambs. Here are the sinking connections to our upper lambs. And here are the empty squares associated with the wee black spots in the CDM. It's cool. We now have an accurate record of our Drawloom setup and, perhaps more importantly, it allows us to see the effects of tie-up changes quickly and accurately. Let's put it to the test. Here's my favorite variant of 6-end irregular satin damask. We start with our empty 6x6 tie-up box. First, the tie-ups to my lower lambs, which weave my ground cloth. I transfer these directly to the CDM. Next, my tie-ups to the upper lambs, which weave my pattern units. I'll leave those squares on the CDM blank. All the remaining squares are filled with black Dalmatian spots. In real time, this is super fun. I'm using the same setup as with my straight twill damask. Here are my pattern and ground shafts threaded as before, with the same lift plan and 6-shaft straight treadling. The only thing I'm changing is my tie-up. Rising connections to the lower lambs first. They're easy, and as I click each box, the drawdown for my lovely satin ground cloth starts to take shape. The connections to my upper lambs are a little trickier. I visualize where those are and leave the boxes blank. All the others I fill in with spots. It's awesome to see my pattern emerge in an entirely different interlacement scheme than I had before. Now let's push the boat out. Thinking of our lower and upper lamps separately as we're doing, there is no reason why we can't put different structures on each, provided none of our connections are doing double duty. For this next example, let's stick with our same irregular satin ground. What happens if we try the same straight twill pattern we used earlier? I'll tell you what. We have this connection and this one trying to force the same shaft up and down at the same time. That won't work. But if we flip our twill diagonal, our conflicts disappear as if by magic. Let's plug our new tie-up into the CDM and see what we get. Since our irregular satin ground remains the same, I've left those connections in the tie-up box. Now I'll picture my twill diagonal advancing from the upper left to the lower right and fill in every other box with dots. Voila! It is instructive to compare our drawdown with a sample of the woven cloth, both the side that faced up and the side that faced down when I was weaving it. I want to pay special attention to the corners of our pattern units, especially when we contrast diagonals in this direction, where the lower left corners show clean cuts, against the diagonals in this direction, where we have funny little two-thread floats interfering with our clean cuts. Our pattern units appear a little bit asymmetrical as a result. This is not terribly visible on the top of the cloth, in my opinion, but on the underside, the two diagonals look very different to my eye. Whether or not you find the aesthetics of this combo pleasing is entirely a matter of personal opinion. I kind of like it, especially the bottom sample, where the pattern is showing as weft effect twill against the satin ground. Let's try another one. For this example, I feel like a broken twill tie-up for my ground cloth. For my pattern, I'm choosing a more traditional 6-end irregular satin variant. I don't see any obvious problems, so off to the CDM I go to combine them into Damask. Yikes-a-rama. I can already see we have what might be charitably called a hot mess. I do like my broken twill ground. I think it scans pretty well on the actual cloth too, especially on the upper face. And my satin pattern looks classic and nice. But the overall effect is one of great busyness. My eye just isn't sure where to look. And the transitions between pattern and ground are awful. I'm not at all jazzed about these weird floats that are messing horribly with my clean cuts on these diagonals. And these crazy little tails coming off these units fill me with dismay. In my very personal opinion, this is a good example of just because we can do it doesn't mean we should. It might be time to go back to the CDM to see if I can't clean things up a bit. And of course, there's lots of other combos to try. I hope you'll experiment with 6-end damask structures on your Drawloom, no matter how you decide to try them out. Have fun, and as always, thank you so much for watching.